Today's video is going to be a bit of a mixed bag of horror. From a late night shift at a movie theater, to a Ouija board story, and even a possible cryptid sighting and much more. As always, a huge thank you to the writers, whose links can be found in the description. If you have a story you'd like to have read on the channel, feel free to send it to rylhstories@gmail.com. Please be sure to drop a like and comment if you enjoy. Subscribing if you're new is also very appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. You know the hardest part about the economy? Keeping up with your bills while your pay stays the same. Verizon, DirecTV, AT&T Internet, they all have annual premiums that are going up each and every year that my job cannot compensate for. Times have gotten hard for me and my family. My wife cannot work due to having children, and the cost of childcare being too much to counterbalance the pay that she'd have coming in. So I picked up a side job at our movie theater. I knew the supervisor pretty well since we've had a family party at the theater before, so I already had my foot in for the job. My first day was awesome. I made popcorn, rang customers up, and even got a couple tips. We aren't allowed to actually pocket the tips, so we have a cup for when customers are short on the amount, so we can make it up. I wasn't too concerned about the hourly wage, since I needed money anyway, just the amount of hours. I needed hours more than anyone at this point to keep my family alive and afloat. I was scheduled to open every single day on the weekend. My hours were 2 to 8. We had 3 showings a day for these weekends, and the last one wrapped up around midnight. I never got to close, but I was told that we got more money for the later hours. I had to work my way into the closing shifts. Weeks went by and I was still opening every single day. I had to talk to Chad about changing up my schedule. I tried telling him that I had appointments in the early afternoon, and I wasn't able to work the opening shift, but I could close. He looked at me with a sharpening stare. I don't think that's going to work. He told me I could come in later though, and just leave at 8 again. I came in at 3:30 and worked until 8. I felt tension in the break room, tension at the counter even. Did I intrude on Eric, Sam, and Sarah's setup? I'm just trying to make more money, but they don't have families. Why do they need to work every single closing shift? I have never gone to a 10 p.m. showing before, and always left at 8. What's the big deal? I sweep after every single showing and take out the trash for every trash can. I literally do everything. I feel as if I deserve the benefits of my hard work. At this point, I've been working here for 5 months. Opening shifts for every single weekend. Friday is a blur, not too many people. Saturday is a slow tick on the clock. No one came to the 6 p.m. showing, and I left early. Sunday comes around and I sit down with Chad during the 3 p.m. movie. He tells me that he knows why I got the job, and started working so hard. He understands times are hard for me. I think we can try to have you close on Friday nights. Does that sound good? Chad asked. At this point I was ecstatic. Yeah, finally, the money will make up for not getting into bed until 1. I miss my family in the evenings, but I'm doing what I can to make sure our lives aren't a living hell. I come in Friday at 5. I clock in and it's just Chad and I. Where did everyone else go? He told me it'd be a slow night, so he gave everyone else the night off. It was The Mule, Aquaman, and Mary Poppins. We've played these movies at least 10 times each now, so he was right. There wouldn't be that many people. The funny thing is, even if we have one person, we have to press play. One paying customer is revenue to the box office, and they make us do it. We had 5 people for The Mule, 2 for Aquaman, and 3 for Mary Poppins. At this point, it gets, well, weird. Have you ever heard the phrase, "Be careful what you wish for"? One of the funniest things about working at the theater, you get to study people, their actions, their habits. People always sit near one another, even if they're strangers in an empty theater. The closing scene for Poppins is playing. The 3 people are sitting within 2 rows of each other, just as I expected. The scene closes and credits start rolling. I flip the lights to turn the wall bulbs on and start to open the doors. I walked out and propped the door open and said goodnight to the first two people who left. Thanks to Marvel, people sit to the very end of the credits to see if there is a scene to watch. "We have a sitter, ladies and gentlemen," I joked to Chad. He looked at me and grinned. I've never seen him grin like this before. I let it slide and he started talking to me about closing duties, pay, and most importantly, our boss Dean. I've never seen Dean before, only pictures on the wall for company pride purposes. He was a weird looking dude, to be honest. Chad was saying something about food. Dean and him cooked, but I wasn't quite listening, because the last customer wouldn't leave. I looked up again to see if the guy was leaving, and he just fell forward. His limp, unconscious body just laid against the seat in front of him. Chad yelled, "Let's get to work." Get to work? I'm not an EMT, call an ambulance. I freaked out at Chad. He laughed at me and said, "Right." That's when it hit me. Dean, duties, food, cooking. Chad walked over to the body and grabbed his torso. "Grab the legs," he said. "Bro, I'm not into this type of stuff. What the fuck are you doing?" "Look, you've been here long enough. It's time you become one of us," Chad said. "One of you? What the hell?" "Every night we pick one or two good customers. One that we've never seen before, and we just, use them," Chad explained. "Use them for what? Bro, I can't be doing this. I have kids. A wife." "Calm down, man. It's nothing big. Do you honestly think that our hot dogs are the best around because they're store-bought?" Chad asked. "Well, yeah, I've had some and they're pretty good." Chad couldn't contain himself anymore and finally snapped. "We fucking cut them up and make the food out of them." I couldn't believe what I had heard. I couldn't stop thinking about his statements. I ate food from the theater so many times. Everyone did. It was our lunch every day. I helped Chad carry the body once I snapped out of my psychosis. "This can be my last shift closing," I told him. "I don't want to do this anymore." Funny thing is, Chad was in a position of power to me. He knew exactly where we were carrying this body, but I didn't. I didn't want to come off scared, but didn't want to do it. I told him I'd help him this time, but not anymore after this. "Fine," Chad proclaimed. We carried the body upstairs into the management office. There was a small door there that was always locked. Chad took out the key and opened the door. It was a freezer. There were so many freezer corpses, each like the other, some cut up, some fresh. I couldn't believe my eyes. "Well, this is it. The secret sauce." Chad laughed. "Right," I said. "Let's just go." We walked downstairs and there was Dean. "Everything good, fellas?" Dean asked. I wanted to snitch, telling him what just happened. Then Chad laughed and said, "Yeah, you got a big one." Dean knew. He fucking knew. I couldn't fathom that higher management was in on this. I had to tell someone. I looked at the clock and saw the time. 1 a.m. "Well, guys, I have to clock out. Early morning with the kids," I said. Dean smiled at me. "Ah, yeah, the family man. Glad you've joined the team." I was so scared I couldn't move, as Dean wrapped his lanky, hairy, frail arm around me. "Think of this as some thank you presents," he said, as he handed me a small envelope. "Sure, thanks," I said, trying to muster enough courage to step away from him. I got home. I needed a shower so badly. It set in. We just threw a body into a freezer. We are going to eat him. I've eaten people. I just sat on the bathroom floor and broke down. I can't move. I can't think about anything else. 4:30 rolls around and my wife comes into the bathroom. She looks at me and screams. She didn't expect me to be sitting on the floor. I must have just sat there all night, lost. I was so confused and so concerned. I couldn't be doing this all the time. I get up and tell her I earned a bonus at the job yesterday. She laughed and asked if it was a bag of popcorn. We sat at the table together and opened the envelope. It was a check for $10,000. "Good work," read the note. She freaked out and said I must have saved the life of his children or something. I nervously laughed. "Right, something like that," I said. "Something like that." I live in a small town, and sometimes things about small towns aren't always what they seem at first glance. It seems quaint when you drive through, but that is something those that live outside of town see. Sometimes even as residents, we don't even know everything. Such is the case with small forgotten towns across the country, that time seem to forget in some ways. It's not to say it doesn't appear all rosy and normal. We've got our small grocery store, a gas station, a few restaurants, and even a barber. You might be wondering why I mention a barber. Well, I often too wondered why we even had one. The population of our town couldn't possibly sustain a single barber shop. It didn't make sense. I never went there, but I knew my friends had. Their fathers had, and even their grandparents. Now this seems a little odd, you'd think, but Old Man John's, as the shop was called, had always been there. When you think old man, you figure the guy was just that, old. Well, as fate would have it, one day I decided to get my hair cut there, for the sake of convenience. I had never been in the shop before, but it was like stepping onto a Hollywood set, depicting a 1950s barbershop. Old guy was finishing up cutting someone's hair. I took a seat. He spotted me in the mirror and said, "Hey there, mister. Haven't seen you around before. You from town or just stopping by?" I told him I had lived just up the road, and hadn't stopped there before. The other customer paid for his haircut and left. I was left in the shop alone with the barber. He introduced himself as John. We shared a friendly conversation. He said he had owned the shop for years, but neglected to say how long exactly he had owned it. He proceeded to start giving me a haircut, as you'd picture the whole process of in a movie. He was telling me how he liked to hunt and fish. Sure enough, there were some trophy bucks mounted on the wall, some giant trout he had caught. A few more customers walked in, but I didn't recognize them, which is kind of unusual because you basically know everyone in a small town. Old Man John asked if they were from town or not. They said they were from out of town. As he was wrapping up on me, an old bloodhound came out of the back of the shop. I was a bit startled. Old Man John said, "Oh, don't mind her. That's my old gal Rosie. She likes to greet the customers and comes on my hunts." I petted her and she sniffed my hand. I paid for the haircut and he said not to forget he went on vacation several times a year for hunting or fishing trips, and if he was ever not around to just check the sign on the window. I thanked him and left as he prepared to take one of the other customers. I saw he was closed for a week or so in late August, with a sign on the door that said, "Gone hunting." A few weeks later he was open again, so I figured I'd stop in for a trim. I asked him how his hunting trip had gone. He said it had been very good, and he enjoyed the time off. I was the only one in the shop that day. As he was finishing up, Rosie came out of the back wagging her tail excitedly and licking my hand. I petted her and John said not to mind. She was still excited over the hunting trip because she had been well fed. After Old Man John wrapped up, he asked me if I wanted to see what he had got on his trip. I figured why not. So I followed him down some stairs that were off the back room Rosie kept coming out of. Once we got down there, he said to me, "I was really happy no one came in today, because I can't share what I catch on these hunts with just anyone." He turned on the lights and mounted on plaques were the heads of the customers that had followed me into the shop the first time around. "I trust you won't tell anyone about this. Mostly everyone in town knows anyways. That stops by more than once. Besides, Rosie's got your scent and she likes a good steak for dinner." His, now that I think of them, cold blue eyes had an odd twinkle to them as he said it. I kept my mouth shut. I followed Old Man John back up the stairs. He walked up the stairs rather briskly for a man who must be in his 80s. As we got to the top, he said to me, "Hope to see you again soon. Take care." I haven't been back since. He just got back from an Alaskan hunt, according to the sign on his window, but I know differently now. Next time you see that small barber shop nestled in some small town, think long and hard before stopping in for a quick bit of nostalgia. I'm not too concerned for my own safety. Besides, the cops aren't going to do anything because I've seen their car parked out in front numerous times before. I doubt Old Man John is going to check here to find me spilling the beans, and even so, I haven't disclosed where I live for obvious reasons. So this happened in 2014. I was 18 at the time. It was a pretty normal Saturday morning. I woke up around 9 a.m., got dressed, and ate my breakfast. Then my mother came upstairs and said that she talked to my grandma on the phone, and Grandma said that Grandpa didn't return from the hunt he went on yesterday. My grandpa was a casual wild animal hunter. He was also very wealthy. He bought me a 2011 BMW M3 for my 18th birthday. Grandma tried to call the police, but they just cannot do anything with that because they can't find his hunting base in the woods. Upon hearing this, I went outside, got into my car, and drove out into the woods. Then I learned that my car is really bad off-road, so I had to drive slow. Hardly, I found my grandpa's hunting base. His SUV was there, his guns were inside the base, but Grandpa was nowhere to be seen. I tried calling his phone because it had a really loud ringtone, but nothing. I looked around in the woods, near his base while calling out his name, but I couldn't find anything, not even a footstep in the snow. After a while I gave up and got back into my car and drove home. I told my mom everything. Of course we let the police know as well, but we couldn't figure out what happened to Grandpa. Maybe he wandered too far into the woods and got lost. No, that's impossible. He was a well-experienced hunter. He was hunting for over 3 decades and knew the woods very well. I couldn't sleep that evening. I was rolling in my bed thinking about where Grandpa could have been. I had enough. I got up at 11 p.m., grabbed a flashlight and my car keys, and went back into the woods. As I arrived, his car was still there, and everything still seemed fine there. I checked the base and it was normal as well, until I noticed a huge slash on the side of the base. That wasn't there last time. I got really creeped out by that, and what happened next froze my blood. I heard shuffling coming from the woods. I nervously said, "Who's there?" Then I saw it. It was a male wolf slowly walking towards me, but then the wolf suddenly stood up on its own 2 feet. That's when I realized actually how tall this thing was. The creature was around 9 feet tall. This creature had a really unusual deep growling sound, almost like a dog growling, but it was like 1,000 times deeper. Then it started to open its eyes. They were glowing red. My heart skipped a beat. I quickly opened my car, jumped in and put it in drive and floored it. I glanced back at the rearview mirror and saw the creature was standing in the middle of the road. His glowing red eyes were staring at me. I got home quickly, locked all the doors and windows, and told my parents what just happened. Obviously, they didn't believe me. I told the police the same thing, but when they went out to my grandpa's hunting base, they didn't find the slash on the side of the base. This happened 4 years ago. I'm 22 now, and I never went out into those woods since then, and I don't think I ever will. April was always interested in scary stories, ghosts, and paranormal stuff in general, so it was no surprise that when her dad pulled out an old dusty Ouija board out of the loft, she was intrigued and wanted to try it straight away. Her best friend of 12 years, Mindy, was on holiday in Portugal at the time, so she had to hold back her excitement and wait a few days for Mindy to get back. When Mindy was finally back from Portugal, the girls met up at April's house on a day that they picked very precisely, as it was the only day that the girls were completely home alone. It was a Friday. Fridays are usually the day when both of April's parents get back home from work extremely late, which was usually at around 12:30 at night. Mindy was a few minutes away from April's house when April started setting up for the night. She had made sure she had read all of the rules of the game online, which she thought was enough to keep her and Mindy safe. As April was lighting the candles, there was a knock at the door. She walked over to it to open it for Mindy. Mindy walked into the kitchen admiring the old battered board, as April locked the front door. "Are you sure this is safe?" Mindy shouted with a puzzled look on her face while her hand was slowly sweeping off the thick gray layer of dust and cobwebs that had settled on the board. "Yes, 100%. I checked all the rules and researched everything. We're going to be fine," said April, while she confidently strutted back into the kitchen. "Let's get started then," she said. The girls sat down opposite each other on a small table in the corner of the kitchen. They nodded to each other and gently placed their fingers on the planchettes. "Are there any spirits that want to contact us?" said April. They waited. Nothing. After many failed attempts, the planchette finally started to move towards the word yes. April and Mindy looked at each other, slightly scared but still smiling. "Who are you?" asked Mindy. The planchette moved, finally spelling out the name Grant. "And are you a good or a bad spirit, Grant?" asked April, who was visibly freaked out now. For a few seconds, nothing moved at all. Suddenly the planchette started to violently spin and scratch the surface of the board. Mindy quickly moved her hand away from the planchette out of shock. "What are you doing? You're not supposed to take your hands off the damn thing until you say goodbye." "I'm going home," shouted Mindy, while grabbing her shoes and waving around her arms. Before April could do anything, Mindy had run out the door. Out of anger, April pushed the board off the table and shouted, "You always do this." The time was around 10:30 when April sat down on the sofa with a blanket and the remote to watch a movie. Halfway through the movie, April's eyes got tired and started to close, so she decided she would sleep on the sofa, at least until her parents came back, and then she would move to her bed when they were home. April finally awoke from the uncomfortable nap. As she checked the clock, she noticed that her chest felt heavy, and when she ran her hand down her back, she felt scratches across it. She thought that maybe she fell asleep on the remote, and it had scratched up her back, so she made her way to the bathroom to look in the mirror. It was now 12, so April assumed her parents were on their way home. As April lifted up her shirt to look in the mirror, the light switched off. April screeched and reached for the light switch. But when her hand went to touch the light switch, the sinister giggle of a man filled the room, as she realized what her hand was touching was a cold, bony hand. It was now 12:30, and it was too late. I'm a light sleeper. I've been that way as long as I can remember. There's just something about giving myself over to complete unconsciousness that I find frightening. As a result, I'm tired a lot, which makes me cranky and unproductive. But what can I do? I've tried all sorts of sleep remedies, from the doctor-prescribed stuff to homemade concoctions, and all kinds of junk that doesn't work. I feel lucky if I can get 3 hours a night. I hate it. Needless to say, I spend too much time in my bed rolling around until I fall asleep from exhaustion. If it were up to me, I'd just get up and do something on the computer, or read a book. But my parents get really hostile if I'm up after bedtime on a school night. So there I am in my own personal hell, night after night. 2 nights ago I was laying there with my eyes closed, wishing that the melatonin I took before bedtime would kick in. But it didn't, so I was anguishing over all kinds of FML crap. It wasn't bad enough I had to live through whatever humiliation the day brought me, but I'd have to relive it over and over when I climbed into bed and turned off the lights. I was there in the dark thinking about algebra, and how much I hate it because I suck at math. It was especially awful since I had a bitchy teacher who was mean enough to ridicule me in front of the whole class when I got the answer wrong, which was most of the time. I felt my face get red all over again when I remembered how the class laughed at me after one of her snotty remarks. My train of thought was derailed, however, when I heard something in the room with me. It sounded like someone breathing. That was freaky. I didn't share my room with anyone, and the door was closed. I was way up at the top of the stairs, in what used to be the attic, until my parents converted it so I wouldn't have to share a room with my little brother. The rest of the family was on the second story of the house. I shouldn't be able to hear anyone else breathing, even if they had asthma and slept in front of a megaphone. But I could hear it. A regular, steady breathing sound, like someone who's sleeping might make. My eyes popped open in terror, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness. I automatically held my breath to make sure it wasn't my own air intake I was hearing. In, out, the relaxed breath of a sleeper. With my hand shaking, I reached over and pulled the chain on my bedside lamp. When the light went on, the sound instantly stopped. There was no one in the bedroom but me. Could I have fallen asleep and not known it? Did I dream hearing those inhalations? I didn't think that was possible, but unless I was losing my mind, I didn't know what else it could be. I turned off the light, flipped my pillow over, and resumed my not sleeping. A few minutes later, it started again. A slow, rhythmic breathing that was louder than any normal person's breath should be. I didn't wait at all this time before snapping on the light, and just like before, the sound stopped when I hit the light switch. There was no way I was staying around for this creep show. I grabbed a blanket off my bed and headed downstairs. I woke up the next morning with my mom peering down at me, asking what I was doing on the couch. I told her I had a bad dream, and she seemed to accept this and didn't hassle me. I went back up to my room to get ready for school. All day long I kept thinking about what I'd heard the night before, and I'd about halfway convinced myself that what I heard couldn't have been real. I was probably hallucinating, as a side effect from a prolonged lack of sleep. I didn't feel that nervous about the whole thing until it was time to get to bed again. Then I have to admit, I got a little freaked out. Since my whole relationship with sleeping wasn't the best, I always looked at bedtime somewhat uncomfortably, so this wasn't that much different. After I turned off the lights, I pulled the covers over my head as a safety precaution. Having the bedspread over your head is a well-known monster repellent, so I decided to not take any chances. And there it was again. Not 5 minutes after I turned off the lights, I heard the breathing sound in the room with me. I couldn't help myself. I let out a scream loud enough to wake the entire block. My parents were in my room in no time, along with my little brother trailing behind them. "What's going on?" my dad yelled, waving a golf club around. "There's someone in my room," I sobbed. My mom turned on the wall switch and lit up the room. My dad opened up my closet door and moved stuff around. Then he peered under the bed. "There's nobody in this room except us," my dad declared, and kinda gave me the stink eye when he said it. "You've just had a bad dream, honey," said my mom in a kinder voice. "I haven't had a bad dream," I insisted. Then I tried to explain what I'd heard. I had an invisible breather in my room sucking up all the air. Of course, nobody believed me, except maybe my little brother. But he believes everything you tell him, so that didn't make me feel any better. Dad commanded me to go back to sleep, and everyone trooped out of the room, leaving me alone in the dark. I couldn't go back to sleep because in order to go back to sleep, I would have had to have fallen asleep in the first place. I pulled the covers over my head, and lay there shaking to hear the breathing sounds. But instead of breathing, I heard quiet laughter. When I was 14, I was placed in a short-term mental health facility. A bit of background. I've had depression and social anxiety my whole life. after my mom died the previous year and my dad remarried, my stepmom was all kinds of in my business. She was determined that my suicidal thoughts and artwork were the result of my mother's death, though it was more because this new woman was completely nuts and had completely uprooted me from my previous life. New town, new school, new family. So after one particular frustrating day in math class, I scribbled out an annoyed note, which was then misinterpreted as a suicide note. Next thing I know, I'm being driven to this mental hospital, while my stepmom screams at me about being selfish or whatever. There's not much to be said about the facility itself, pretty standard stuff. Girls and boys were in different wings, and each room had 3 or 4 people. There were cameras in the rooms, just to be sure we weren't hurting ourselves or our roommates, but it's not like we were being watched constantly. On the 3rd night I was there, I went to bed like normal, and slept for a bit. I woke up, and at what hour I don't know, and was on my back, looking around the room. It was dark, but I could see the room relatively well by the moonlight coming from the window. My 2 roommates were fast asleep. Everything looked normal, which is how I know this wasn't a dream. The room would never look this correct if I was dreaming. I noticed then at the foot of my bed was a black mass. I hesitate to call it a figure, but I guess I could discern where a head and shoulders were outlined. The mass was darker than the room, and I looked at it, mostly just confused. As I observed it, it moved to the side of my bed, and I turned on my side to keep looking at it, meaning this wasn't sleep paralysis. For some reason, I reached out toward it. It was really odd in that it was really hard to tell how far away it was, like those 3D illusions, where you know you're touching it, but it seems to go right through your hand. As I touched the mass, I felt this warm wave of calm wash over me. Whatever it was, I don't think it had any ill intent. After touching it, I pulled my arm back under the cover and fell back asleep. To this day, I've never experienced anything else like it, and I don't know what that thing was, or why the hell I wanted to touch it.